Good afternoon. Welcome to the big show. The big show. Obviously, we do it every single day. We talk Steelers. We talk about the Pirates. We talk about all things Pittsburgh sports. We talk about as much as we can. We try and make sure that we mix in a little bit of Pitt, a little bit of the Penguins. Right now, the Penguins aren't really a big topic. Not much is going on. I know that they had a draft, and they're signing guys or making some small trades. Obviously, the big thing hanging over everybody's head is that the Fenway Sports Group wants to sell the Penguins, but we got that, plenty of time to talk about the Penguins down the road. We talk mostly about the Steelers right now because, training camp has begun. And guess what? Got to run Aaron Rodgers out of town. I'm kidding. But first pass he made, it was intercepted by Patrick Queen. I'm sure all the people that were up at Saint Vincent were kind of like, wow, this is not what it's not what we signed up for here. And anyway, it is kind of funny, though. Everybody's been waiting and anticipating. Aaron Rodgers is finally going to be here in a Steelers uniform. Let's see what he does. And he goes out and throws an interception in his first pass. Apparently his second pass was batted down, but he had a good sense of humor about it. Basically said, got that one out of the way. I'm going to throw some picks. I'm going to throw some touchdowns too, he says. That's what he said. And if you think about it, he's got 503 touchdowns in his career. I think that's probably speaking for itself. He said basically that, the chemistry of the team, I think, he said the chemistry of the offense is coming together. They've had, 15, 16, 17, whatever practices. He feels better and better about the offense every day. He feels better and better about the chemistry with his teammates. Feels like this is a team, that is going to get better as they play together more. And I think that's one of the things that he stressed the most. The number of reps they have together will really, really be important. And so I think that's the biggest thing. And I think one of the other things he said that I thought was really interesting, because we were told, by some people that he was a bad teammate, a clubhouse, a locker room cancer, and all this other nonsense, right? One of the things he said, two things that were very interesting. Number one, he said, finding the chemistry and hanging out with each other in the lunchroom in different times that we have, growing together through our practice and away from practice. Doesn't sound to me like he's a prima donna, does it? Doesn't sound to me like he's a guy who doesn't want to get involved with his teammates or what all this other stuff that we keep hearing about him. And then, of course, the other thing is, he came in a day early. Everyone else reported Wednesday. Do you remember all the way back 24 hours ago where there were criticisms of Aaron Rodgers because nobody had seen him pull up? Everybody was standing, all the media guys were standing there in the parking lot watching all these guys come in. And there were people saying, well, we haven't seen Aaron Rodgers yet. But is he being a prima donna and all this other good stuff? Well, as it turns out, guess what? He actually came in a day early. That's why nobody saw him. And I think that's the key to this thing. Now that they're playing football, finally, now that they're on the field, the next time we're going to hear about off-field nonsense, involving Aaron Rodgers at least, will be in the regular season if he throws a pick or he has a bad game. It's one of those things where it's amazing. Here's the other thing. For a prima donna, it's kind of interesting. It's one of those things where he actually said in his entire career he has always had a roommate. This year, it's DK Metcalf, which is probably a smart move on the Steelers' part. And I think one of the things about it is, he's like, hey, our relationship grows all the time. His exact quote, DK and I have worked out in the offseason, got a good relationship, talked a lot about football stuff. We FaceTime, we texted during the offseason. After minicamp, so we've got a good relationship. It's going to just keep on growing. End of discussion. Period. End of discussion. So at the end of the day, it's one of those things where I look at it and I basically say, you know what? All of the stuff that we heard about him, it might have been a lot of hot air. It's really what it is. And so I think that really when it comes down to is now that we're playing football, we can let a lot of that stuff go. That's really what it comes down to. And so, Rodgers, of course, we're in the kumbaya stage of everything, but Rodgers says, in fact, he took Calvin Austin. They went out, they threw together a couple of times in the offseason. But he talked about Arthur Smith and basically said, Arthur Smith has really given me a lot of leeway. And he's basically been, in a place where he's willing to listen to what I got. And he said, he's willing to listen to the things that I have to say. So, he threw a bad interception to start, but it was his first pass. But again, like I said, for all of you who are out there saying he doesn't fit the Steelers culture, he doesn't do this, he's a guy who's a prima donna and all that other garbage that we heard. Let's look at the facts. Fact number one, he came in a day before everybody else. He was here Tuesday night, not Wednesday. Fact number two, at least two of the receivers that he's going to be throwing to, probably his number one and his number two, he had off-season on his own throwing sessions with. Number three, he has a roommate. Number four, he said he's always had a roommate. He's never had his own room. And my thing that's funny about that is, if you remember, they had to put up, Antonio Brown, if I'm not mistaken, didn't they have to put him up in a hotel? I mean, at the very least, they had to give him his own room and all that other stuff. But, and I'm not saying that, it's a high bar to climb to be a better teammate than Antonio Brown. But my point is, there are guys in the NFL who have gotten their own room, who have been able to stay in their own room at training camp. And I think that's the key, man. At least for one day. At least for reporting day and the start of training camp, Aaron Rodgers is a guy who basically, has a roommate. It's one of his receivers. By the way, he didn't get to pick his roommate either. That's the other part of it. He said when he walked into the room, he was just hoping, hey, I'm hoping it's not some big lineman or somebody who's a mess, a messy person. I want it to be somebody who really, is going to be reasonably clean and neat and organized. So he didn't even get to pick his own roommate. So again, none of that is prima donna behavior. Prima donnas get their own room, insist on their own room. Prima donnas insist that they don't have to stay with anybody else. And they also say, well, if you're going to make me stay with somebody, then I guess what I have to do, if you're going to make me stay with somebody, let me pick them. And that's what I would tell you. That's where it comes from at least in my estimation, right? I mean, that's really, again, in the offseason, there's a lot of time you waste basically trying really hard to, come up with storylines and all that other stuff. And, of course, Aaron Rodgers made for a lot of easy fodder in my mind. But the reality is now, if you ask me, I don't know. I think we're at a place now where it's going to be very, very interesting to see what does this all look like, because now, at least, we can start to evaluate the field and what they do on the field. That's such an important part of this. Being able to watch what goes on the field, being able to evaluate it, being able to talk about each day's developments. I think that's so important. Apparently they didn't do 7 shots, but they went 11 on 11, and I think one of the things that's really going to be very, very interesting is as they get moved forward, right? How are they going to basically hand out the reps? And what is the offense, the base offense, going to really look like? Jonnu Smith actually met with the media today, and I think that's an interesting guy because he is sort of a wild card we haven't talked nearly enough about. He is sort of a wild card we haven't talked nearly enough about. I mean, at the end of the day, if Calvin Austin or Robert Woods or whoever, if these guys aren't good enough, then I don't know. I got to look at it and basically say, who's their next weapon? Well, it's probably going to be Jonnu Smith, who I think is probably better than Pat Freiermuth. And I think that's the key, is how you're going to basically utilize those two. Well, again, I think it's one of those things where if you've got Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth, one guy probably is your weapon, so to speak. The other guy is sort of your steady Eddie guy. And I think Freiermuth is a guy you can rely on. You can get first downs, runs good routes, will catch the ball in the middle of the field, takes hits, all that kind of stuff. So it is going to be, interesting to see how they mix it all together. But again, we're still in the kumbaya stage of this season, and both guys are saying the exact same thing. You understand what I'm saying? They are both saying, we'll play together, we'll have a great time together, we will, work together, I'll elevate him, he'll elevate me. Pat Freiermuth says, bringing him into the room has only made our room better. I get all that. But here's my question. What happens if one of these guys goes 3 or 4 weeks in a row and it's barely targeted because they keep throwing to the other guy? I mean, Aaron Rodgers used the phrase chemistry, and I think sometimes it's a phrase that we throw around a little too much that's basically just sort of, a catch, sort of a meaningless catch-all phrase, if that makes sense. But the reality is, I often say, does chemistry come before winning, or does winning create chemistry? It's a very fair question, if you ask me. Some people say, well, it's hard to win if you don't have great chemistry. I got to be honest with you. Just in my experience, coaching, I've been around teams that absolutely hated each other, that were dynamite on the court. And I've been around teams that, they were all big, friends. And I've been on parts of teams that were friends and, you couldn't win a game. Chemistry was good, but they couldn't win a game. So I have to believe that winning is what begets chemistry. But the Steelers need to figure it out. They need to find a way to quickly, because, you only got 3 or 4 weeks. And next thing you know, you look up and it's like, oh, my goodness, games are right around the corner. but they've got to kind of quickly figure out everybody's role. That's a big part of chemistry, if you ask me. Figuring out your role and where you fit and how you fit. That's what you're trying to do. And so, that's part of training camp as well. But even though, Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth could be on the field together a lot, and, it's not like they're going to have to develop a chemistry, so to speak, like quarterback and receiver or whatever. The reality is there is going to be a process here where they are going to have to try and figure it out. And if they figure it out and they truly are what they are saying right now, which is, we want to be team first guys and, we want to make sure that the Steelers win. That's all that matters. Okay. If that's the case, then I think it'll work. If it's not the case, then it'll be interesting to see what happens. And here's the other thing. If it's not truly the case, okay, if it's not truly the case, once you get into the dog days of camp, and then the season, I think what happens is, all of a sudden, you start to see some splinters, jealousy, all that good stuff. So this is an important camp. I would agree with, Aaron Rodgers. I saw Jonnu Smith say it. I saw about 3 or 4 other guys said it. Okay. The reality of this all, in my mind, is that they find a way to come together pretty quickly and develop the chemistry that they need to have so that if they go through some hard times, it doesn't pull the team apart. And I think that's important. And I think that's really important. And to me, it's where we're at with the Steelers in the camp right now. I think that's really kind of, the biggest discussion point. Now then, there was first of all, the game's always on at Archie's. Get down to Archie's on, Archie's, by the way. Get down to Archie's on Carson Street. Archie's the home of 80-cent wings Monday through Thursday. Home of the Paul Zeise grilled cheese sandwich. Get down to Archie's, and when you're there, say hello to Archie for me. I will say this. Early in the day, there was some NFL news that probably affected the Steelers from the standpoint of their first opponent's quarterback went down. Now, I don't know how you get it this wrong, but initially, when he went down, the reports were, and I'm talking about Justin Fields with the Jets, the reports were that he probably tore his Achilles. Well, as you know, if he tore his Achilles, he'd be out for the year. And ironically, that's what happened to Aaron Rodgers, by the way. 4 plays into his first season with the Jets, he tore his Achilles. So there's all these stories out there about a torn Achilles, blah, blah, blah. Justin Fields might be out. He could be in a situation where, he's out for the year. He might need surgery. They're getting MRIs and all this other stuff. Okay. How does it come out then? That his injury is actually a dislocated toe? Now, look, we can sit here and talk about whatever you want to talk about. It's a toe, it's not a big thing. Remember, Jack Lambert's career came to an end because of turf toe, which, it's obviously, that would have been, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever it was. We've come a long way in being able to treat these kind of injuries, but don't poo-poo a toe injury. Now, a dislocated toe, it sounds to me like he's going to be okay. Says he should be ready for week 1. Probably not even going to miss significant time at camp. says basically that, this is a day-to-day injury that hopefully they can get it solved or resolved quickly. He can get back into, camp and be able to go through and work with the offense and learn everything else, about the offense. But again, I would caution these people who think it's just like, oh, it's just a toe injury. Who cares? I tell you, as I just said, Jack Lambert's career ended because of a toe injury. Now, I don't know the severity of this injury. It doesn't sound like it's going to need surgery. It doesn't sound like it's going to, keep him out of the next, 3 or 4 weeks. But, if he misses significant time in training camp, that could affect him come game time against the Steelers. I mean, everybody keeps talking about, the opener, sort of how interesting it is that Justin Fields is going to play against his old team and Aaron Rodgers is going to play against his old team. But if Fields is hurt, then it doesn't really matter. But it sounds a lot to me like Fields is going to be okay. So that's a really good thing, I think, because I think all of us would love to see Fields against his old team, the Steelers, and Aaron Rodgers against his old team, the Jets. I think that would be tremendous, honestly. And it sounds like it's still going to happen. There was a real scare, earlier on about it, this was an Achilles and he might be done. I don't know how you go from an Achilles injury to, wait a minute, it's a dislocated toe. But that's what it was. And I think that's where we're at with Justin Fields. He will play against the Steelers unless he has a setback, which he could. He could have a setback. But, at the end of the day, who cares? His setback there would be what? I don't know. Maybe he has another toe injury or he tweaks his knee or something. But I think that's, where we're at with it. And to me, that was kind of the news of the day in the NFL. A couple other guys got hurt, by the way, when it came to today. And that's the brutal thing about football and training camp. You're going to lose a few guys. And I think, you're going to lose them and you're not happy because you lost them in practice. But I don't know. It feels a lot in so many ways. It feels a lot like we just got started with camp. And now, every day we're probably going to find out one guy or someone somewhere else got injured. By the way, I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention, it's the number one story on ESPN, so it has to be, big. If I didn't at least mention that I'm a child of the 80s. And then growing up in the 80s, the world of wrestling, and I'm not talking about high school or college wrestling. I'm talking about, WWF style and all that other stuff. I grew up in the 80s when it was just starting to boom. When it was just going from sort of, backwoods, backwater, small carnivals to county fairs, maybe some bigger matches here and there, to, this unbelievable marketing machine that turned, into a huge TV show every week. And, the stars just grew and grew and grew in stature and all that other stuff. The biggest and brightest of them all was Hulk Hogan. And me growing up, obviously in the early 80s and mid 80s, Hulk Hogan was the man. And I'll say this, I think Hulk Hogan probably is one of the most influential and important wrestlers in that entire genre. And believe me, there's an alphabet soup of different leagues. I can't even keep track of what is, WCW, WWE, WWF, the Glow Ladies of Wrestling. There's all kinds of stuff. But the reality is it all started with Hulk Hogan. He is the guy that took Vince McMahon and the WWF to a completely different level. And quite frankly, John Cena maybe, there's been a few guys, but not many, who can match and make the claim, like Hulk Hogan, that he was the guy that really put wrestling on the biggest stage. There were other guys that built it and built the foundation and all that stuff, but Hulk Hogan was the guy who put it on the biggest stage. So I have to say to one of the guys that I, kind of looked up to as a sports hero or whatever you want to call it, Hulk Hogan, rest in peace. I think what I've found, because there's a whole lot of people, Ozzy Osbourne, a number of people have died recently. One of the things that has really forced me to understand is that I'm getting old. All these guys that were in their 20s and whatever in the 80s and now they're all in their 70s and late 60s, early 70s. Some of them even that were a little bit older are in their 80s. And people at that age die. I don't like acknowledging that, because then you start to talk about my own mortality. Considering I'm 55, I'm not that far around the corner from that. But to me, I say rest in peace to Hulk Hogan, one of the greatest athletes of all time. And I know there's some people say, well, he's a studio wrestler or whatever. Listen, I'm talking about in stature. Hulk Hogan, honestly, was Jordan-like in the wrestling world. Tiger Woods-like in the wrestling world. A guy who just completely takes the entire leg, puts it on his back, puts it on his shoulders, and gets it to where it goes. I say, moving on to the Pirates, somebody asked me in my mailbag today a very interesting question. Who is the Pirate that has the most value on the trade market? Not named Paul Skeens, because that's an easy one. If you take him out of the equation, then, obviously, if you don't take him out of the equation, the reality is, Paul Skeens obviously is the Pirates' most tradable commodity. But among the guys they're going to trade, right? Who has the most value? And there was some talk that O'Neal Cruz, there were people sort of sniffing around him. I don't think he's, would command, this huge haul in return. But you'd get something for him. I think the guy that you get the most for, honestly, Mitch Keller. Starting pitcher that's got 3 years left on his deal. He's 29, still got 3 years after this one left on his deal. A very competent starting pitcher who I could see them plugging in as a number 3 starter on a contender. To me, it's a no-brainer who the Pirates' most tradable guy is. You'd get the most for him. I think the other guy you could trade, I'm not sure how much you could get for him because he is a closer. You'll get something. You'll get a reasonable return, but I don't know that you'll get this big haul. But David Bednar, there's another chip that you can trade. And I think he's a guy that would bring something back. I just don't know that there's the list is much beyond that. They've already said pretty much they're not going to trade O'Neal Cruz. Who's the next guy in line that you want to trade? Oh, Dennis Santana. Okay, a reliever. Beyond that, boy, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, I don't know what you'd get for him. You'll get something, but it won't be great. Tommy Pham, you'll get a bag of baseballs. Spencer Horwitz, you might get a bag of baseballs and a couple of bats. There's just not a whole lot on this major league roster to get excited about in terms of trades. But they got to start thinking about it, got to start thinking about making moves. And I think that's where we're at with it. They really have to figure out how to make moves and whatnot. We will do it one more time tomorrow. Then next week, I think I will be out at training camp at least once to do it out that way somewhere. We've got to figure out the logistics of it, but I'll be out at training camp actually tomorrow, I think, but I'll be back in time to do my video. So at the end of the day, we'll see exactly what happens. Until then, have a good day.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.